George Russell hits the jackpot and secures pole position for the Las Vegas Grand Prix as Max Verstappen qualifies ahead of Lando Norris. If the two drivers finish where they started on Saturday night, Max Verstappen will be crowned a four-time world champion in Sin City. Elsewhere, Franco Colapinto is a doubt for the race on Saturday evening, following a heavy impact which measured at 50 Gs towards the end of Q2. For Racing News 365, my name is Nick Gelding, and I'm delighted to be joined by a very Christmas-themed lead editor, Ian Parks. Ian, we had the casino yesterday. We've now got, it looks like, a Vegas version of a Christmas tree behind you now. Looks spectacular. It's quite clearly very cold out there. Let's start with Mercedes and George Russell, because I think mixed emotions for Mercedes. They have looked like the fastest team over one lap throughout all the running in Las Vegas. Of course, Hamilton topped FP1 and FP2. George Russell topped FP3. Lewis Hamilton then topped Q2, but it was Russell who was a favourite for pole position going into qualifying based on FP3. He secured pole, whereas Lewis Hamilton, two mistakes in Q3, he's in 10th.
Yeah, as you say, hello everyone, and a very chilly welcome, not a very warm welcome on this occasion from Las Vegas. As you can tell, I'm a little bit wrapped up. Nice freebie gift I've got on top of my head. Thanks very much to the Las Vegas Media Center people here for giving away a nice goodie bag that included this, which I didn't know about, but trust me, Nick, it's coming very, very useful today because the temperature right now, approaching 2 a.m. in the morning here, Saturday morning in Las Vegas, it is really quite chilly. And these are the temperatures pretty much that all the drivers, all the teams have had to contend with going through qualifying. And that's had a massive knock-on effect regarding some of the results that we've seen through qualifying. It's one of the reasons why McLaren has emerged as the fifth fastest car out of that qualifying session. Quite remarkable performance from them that they've just not managed to get the car in that window. But you're focusing on Mercedes right now, and rightly so, because as you say, very bittersweet day from them. It really was looking like they were probably going to lock out the front row. And after certainly the way it was looking, I had Lewis Hamilton potentially as the favourite there for that one, because he didn't get to set a final fast lap at the end of FP3 because of a red flag. So that is why George Russell ended up as the fastest. But nevertheless, George Russell carried that through into qualifying. Both Mercedes looked really, really good. They were really on it. Quite clearly, the window for them quite wide in these conditions. That car able to operate really nicely in low grip conditions, really performing well. And yes, it should have been a Mercedes front row lockout, you feel. But yes, George got it right. Lewis just didn't. And he was, how should we say, quite sparing with his comments in the pen post-qualifying. Didn't really want to get into things too much. He just didn't get it right, just made a couple of mistakes, and that's what's really cost him. And that's why he's in 10th and George is on first. So quite the contrasting day for the two British drivers and for Mercedes.
And you'd imagine as well, with Qatar and Abu Dhabi coming up, we're hardly going to see the Las Vegas temperatures at either of those two venues. So realistically, this is probably really the last chance for Lewis to win one final race for Mercedes, a chance which now looks even slimmer based on him starting provisionally in P10. Let's move on to one of the biggest stories from qualifying. Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. Max Verstappen qualified in 5th, Lando Norris directly behind in 6th. Red Bull endured a pretty horrible Thursday in free practice 1 and free practice 2. Have kind of turned things around, at least on one side of the garage. Sergio Perez out in Q1 yet again. McLaren, as you mentioned, they're kind of the 5th best team at the moment, not quite at the races in Sin City. And the crucial thing is, if Verstappen finishes where he qualified and Norris does the same, it means that in just under 24 hours' time, we will be crowning a new 4-time world champion.
Yeah, it's amazing how things can change, isn't it, Nick? Because just in the update following Thursday practice, you rightly called it Thursday, not Friday. I'm nearly
I'm on it today
myself. Thursday practice, as we saw, Red Bull really off the pace, struggling with the rear wing, as we discussed. Basically, it's they don't have basically the way it's been described is that they don't have the right rear wing for this circuit, as we saw in Monza. The budget cap has really played its part. It's hit Red Bull quite hard. And as Christian Horner put it, you basically got to dedicate your resources to what you feel is required at any given time. And it's been unable to do a true low downforce rear wing for Monza for this circuit as well. So that's why it's been playing catch up to a certain extent. And that's why even as well, at the first part of, or the first half of FP3, we again saw Red Bull really struggling on that occasion with regard to its race pace. It was doing a long run simulation. Max and Checo were on the medium tyres that were basically going completely off the boil after just a handful of laps. Max was on the radio complaining vociferously about the fact that the tyres were going off very, very quickly, left front in particular. Rears were going soon after. He was told to continue. Quite clearly, Red Bull were looking to extract as much information as possible, even with those tyres going off. And it got to the point where Max turned around and said, "Look, I can't continue anymore. I'm going to crash." At that point, Red Bull brought him in. They made some setup changes after that medium tyre run, came out on a set of soft tyres, and all of a sudden, that car was back in a reasonable window. Max much, much happier. And that's why he's come out of qualifying in a respectable 5th position. Not exactly what he wanted, of course, bearing in mind what he achieved at this circuit a year ago in that wonderful RB19, but nevertheless, for his Drivers' Championship hopes, and as I say, given that McLaren is really struggling in these low grip conditions, and it's looking game on now for Max Verstappen to win a 4th consecutive title.
A 4th consecutive title for Max, yes. A constructors' title for Red Bull looking ever more unlikely. And that's because we've got to mention quickly Sergio Perez, another driver who has been once again all at seas throughout free practice, like Max was on Thursday. However, as we saw in qualifying, Max turns it around. Checo again out in Q1. I mean, we've spoken a lot about Checo in the F1 updates this year in the podcast, and we've praised him when he has bounced back. And of course, like others, we've criticised him when he has struggled. But is this getting to a point now where Red Bull, despite the contract, do just need to replace him? Because he said there was fundamental issues with the car, but it's just, what do Red Bull do now with Checo? Because quite clearly, big points are not going to be scored by him. This is not a bold prediction either, but big points are not going to be scored by him in the race in Vegas. And with McLaren and Ferrari consistently both having both of their cars in the top 10, what do Red Bull do you think?
I mean, Helmut Marko was asked the question whether Perez was at risk of losing his seat. And he didn't want to say at risk. He basically reiterated the fact that a decision will be taken at the end of the season. Pretty much that's going to be Sergio Perez's D-Day once we come out of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. And yes, as you say, Nick, we've discussed this so many times.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, from the outside looking in, you've got to say it's a no-brainer to get rid of him because they cannot afford to continue to have a driver that is nowhere near the level of their number one driver, Max Verstappen. It's the reason why they are going to lose the constructors' title this year. If they'd had a Checo Perez that was anywhere near the level of Max, if they'd had a Checo Perez that had performed over these last 16, 17 races as he had done in the first handful when he'd scored a reasonable amount of points, then they would be quite comfortably retaining that constructors' title this year. It's not going to happen now. And the key reason is Sergio Perez. And we've heard excuse after excuse after excuse as to why he has not been able to extract performance from that car. But you've got to feel for any employer, regardless of any industry, that employer can only stomach so many excuses from one of its primary employees, in this instance, Checo Perez. The only reason why Red Bull is hanging on to Perez like it is, and the only possible reason why it would want to retain him for next season is the fact he brings in a considerable amount of money with regard to his array of sponsors. That would be a huge financial impact on Red Bull if they decided to get rid of Checo. Understandably so. However, there is also the huge financial impact on Red Bull not retaining its constructors title this season. So it's a big dilemma you've got to feel. They've got to weigh up those two factors. Which one is the more costly? And but for the sake of Red Bull, for the sake of its employees, and bearing in mind every single employee within Red Bull would be on a constructors championship bonus, then they're looking at Checo Perez and thinking, you've cost us my bonus this
Yeah.
Christmas, effectively. So they know they've got drivers waiting in the wings. They've got Yuki Tsunoda. And he's again turned around and said, look what I can do, guys. Give me
Yeah.
that chance. Great performance from Yuki Tsunoda in qualifying today. They know they've got Liam Lawson as well, that they're trying to make a case. Not such a great performance from Liam Lawson in qualifying today. And also they got Isaac Hadjar, but obviously they're not going to promote him straight away
Yeah.
in that car. Not when they've got Yuki and Liam, vying for that seat
Yeah.
potential. So, as I say, using that phrase again from our outside perspective looking in, you've got to think that there is no way that Checo Perez will be in that Red Bull seat in 2025. However, there are all those financial considerations to weigh up first on Red Bull's behalf. And that's why there is going to be long discussions taking place after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix as to what to do for next season.
You mentioned there Yuki Tsunoda, and he did so well, in fact, qualified P7, actually splitting the McLarens, very useful for Red Bull. And Red Bull and Sergio Perez aside the garage are very much going to be scratching their heads. If you look at Williams, they were scratching their heads more in just disbelief, because whilst we were recording this video, you imagine that they have got a very, very long night ahead of them. Franco Colapinto having another massive crash, huge impact, measuring over 50 Gs in the dying seconds of Q2, damaging 3 corners of his FW46. I mean, Ian, he is a doubt for the race because the incident was over 50 Gs. He will be evaluated in the morning before the race. And I mean, it was Williams have done so well to get 2 cars to Vegas as well as spare parts. But giving the financial impact of all these crashes, this is perhaps the biggest one yet.
You would assume so, but it's just a cumulative effect at the end of the day, Nick. I mean, we've drawn up a list in one of our articles that will be going
Yeah.
out on Racing News 365 of all the crashes that have taken place by Williams drivers over the course of this season. And it runs into, I think, double figures in terms of the total number of crashes. And as for the cost, we are talking multi-millions of dollars. James Vowles, after the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, was asked about the financial impact of all those crashes that took place over the course of that weekend. And he simply put it as north of 1 million, south of 10. So you've got to assume that we're talking somewhere in the region of about 4 to 5 million that weekend cost. And if you add on then the financial cost of all the other crashes that have taken place over the course of this season, we're probably looking somewhere in the region of 20, 25 million total. And I'm drawing a figure out of the air, but the cumulative, as I say, cost over the course of the season, it can't be too far south of that figure or north of that figure, or whatever, So this is, you got to feel for Williams. It's just like it's a team that cannot catch a break. They replaced Logan Sargent because of the crash damage that he was causing. If you remember, he had a crash at the Dutch Grand Prix. And that
Massive.
effectively was it for James Vowles. He decided that Logan had gone as far as he could. Franco Colapinto has come in and has done a wonderful job, been lauded, been touted for a possibility of going to Red Bull. And here we are in the space of 3 days on track. If you think of the Sunday in the Brazil, and if you think of the day yesterday and today, so that's 3 days in the space, 3 crashes effectively in 3 days that he's had. And now all of a sudden, this shining light of Formula One, a guy that was as I say, touted so heavily as a future F1 star, is now all of a sudden that luster has been taken off that shining star, and it's a question of, wow, is he as good as we think he is? That's going to be a question out there now. We've seen great stuff from Franco, but all of a sudden he's going to be feeling it. The team is definitely feeling it. And as I say, the look on James Vell's face when the camera panned on to him on the pit wall after this latest crash, you could just tell it was just one of sheer disbelief, as if to say, really, this has happened to me, us as a team again. He must have been thinking, surely not. I've got to pinch myself here because this cannot be happening. This is just terrible, terrible times for Williams. They've just got to rise above it, just get on with their job, rebuild that car yet again, as you say, another long night in store, and just hope, above all hope, that both Alex and Franco can stay out of the walls on Saturday night, Las Vegas time.
And of course, we do hope that Franco is okay and able to race. And of course, as soon as we know what's happening with that, we'll obviously let you know on Racing News 365. Let's talk about quickly Ferrari, because they went into qualifying not really expecting to be in the fight for pole position. Carlos Sainz starts second, Charles Leclerc in fourth. Ferrari have been looking at their race pace. Leclerc actually in free practice had the best race pace. And it seems that the likes of McLaren, Red Bull and Mercedes have been looking at Ferrari in terms of the favourites for the race. With the Constructors' Championship in mind as well, Ferrari starting second and fourth, McLaren sixth and eighth. This is a big, big opportunity to Ferrari to really eat into that 36-point deficit.
Yeah, I made a point in one of the pieces that I wrote earlier that if you look at the last triple header, Ferrari took 39 points out of McLaren over the course of those three races in the United States, Mexico, and Brazil. A repeat of that scenario over the course of three races, they will be Constructors' Champions. They've still got a bit of work to do, but yes, they are in an exceptionally good position going into the Las Vegas Grand Prix, given, as you say, the very solid race pace of that SF24 compared to the McLaren. Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal, have not long come out of his post-qualifying media session. He's conceded that they've got a hell of a lot of work to do to get a reasonably good performance out of this Grand Prix. They've got to play the long game. They've got to be patient. It is a track at the end of the day on which they can overtake. They know that. So it could still be close at the end of the day, but nevertheless, it's advantage Ferrari, most definitely, going into the Las Vegas Grand Prix. And you got to think, if all four cars come home, both Ferraris and both McLarens, then you've got to assume that Ferrari will once again be taking some points out of McLaren. And that gap come the end of this Grand Prix could be down into its 20s. That's one to savour, then going into the last two Grand Prix. But as I mentioned in the update post-practice, I did suggest that McLaren are favourites for the Qatar Grand Prix. Everybody believes there that they've got the car, given the temperatures, given that circuit. So it could be game on for them in that for next weekend's Grand Prix when we move on to Doha.
But they've still got to get through Saturday night first. And just finally, Ian, because I can see how visibly cold it is there, we've got to give a very, very quick mention to Alpine and Pierre Gasly on the back, of course, of Alpine securing a shock double podium in Sao Paulo. Pierre Gasly's gone and put his car third on the grid. I mean, we speak about the money and how important big points are at the moment for the midfield teams. And for Alpine, of course, went from 9th to 6th in Sao Paulo. They've now got a brilliant chance to further extend their advantage over Haas and RB. What a performance by Pierre.
Absolutely brilliant. He's turned into something of a quality specialist of late. Because he's done really well over the one laps, as we've seen in recent sessions. And here he goes again, pulling out an absolutely superb performance on this occasion. He's put it down to the fact that that car, unlike some of its rivals, of course, like McLaren mentioned, has found itself in a really good window with regard to these much colder, low grip conditions. It's like a bit like Mercedes. It's a car that's working well. Now, obviously, for Esteban Ocon, his teammate, not so much. He's really struggled of late. and he's been at a loss to try and close that deficit to his teammate. He starts 11th, so at least he's still got a chance of getting into the points. But yes, it's a fascinating one. We've got Pierre in third, as you say, Yuki Tsunoda in seventh for RB,
7th.
Nico Hulkenberg in ninth, I believe, for
Yep.
Haas. And then you've got just outside the top 10, you've got Esteban Ocon and Kevin Magnussen in the other Haas. So plenty of points on the table for those 5 drivers. Liam Lawson looking perhaps a little bit too far back to try and sneak into the points. Never say never, because this is a street circuit at the end of the day, and who knows what might happen. But yes, again, Alpine, surprisingly, coming out of qualifying with the upper hand over their main rivals for that very lucrative 6th position. And what a turnaround it would have been in a very short period of time for that team. Bearing in mind, it was languishing in 9th, and that's looked like where it was going to finish this season.
Just to very quickly run through the provisional top 10. George Russell is on pole position and is joined by Sainz on the front row. Gasly and Leclerc make up row 2. Verstappen 5th, Norris 6th, Tsunoda 7th, Oscar Piastri in 8th, Hulkenberg 9th, Lewis Hamilton 10th. And I'm going to give a quick special mention to Zhou Guanyu, who outqualified Valtteri Bottas and made it into Q2. Massive performance by him. Very, very quickly in bold predictions, I'll get it out of the way. Ferrari 1-2. Your turn.
Bloody hell, you're going to have to give me a chance these days, mate, because they're always going first, I've noticed. So that doesn't leave me much wiggle room, does it? You know, where do you want me to go? Right,
you know what, on this occasion,
we're going
go
to
the
start
same if you want.
taking it in turns now. You go first on one occasion, I go first on the next.
Okay.
Thank you very much. There we go. So where am I going to go after that? Well, I don't think Pierre is going to finish on the podium, in all fairness to him. He might have had a great qualifying.
Yeah.
I'm going to look for Lewis Hamilton to at least make it into the top 5. And I'm going to go, I think George will complete the podium at least behind that Ferrari 1-2.
Lovely stuff. There you go, folks. And of course, for those watching this video, let us know your thoughts on anything we've discussed in the comment section below. And let us know your bold predictions as well. Do you think Max Verstappen will secure his 4th world title? And on that note, please make sure to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel. And from a very chilly Ian and I, we will see you after the race tomorrow. See you later.
I'm going off to warm up now, Nick. Take care.